The silence in the Sterling mansion was louder than any scream. For 5 years, billionaire tech mogul Caleb Sterling had access to the world's best doctors, the most advanced therapies, and limitless resources. Yet nothing could buy the one thing he wanted more than life itself: the sound of his son's voice. Little Leo hadn't spoken a single word since the accident that took his mother. Caleb had resigned himself to a life of quiet despair, convinced his son was lost inside his own mind. That was until a rainy Tuesday night in a cheap roadside diner, where a waitress with tired eyes and holes in her shoes did something in 5 minutes that $1 million never could. But when Caleb makes a move to change her life, he uncovers a secret that threatens to destroy his empire, and the only person who can save his son. The rain battered the sleek, black roof of the Maybach, a rhythmic drumming that usually soothed Caleb Sterling. Tonight, however, it only amplified the pounding headache settling behind his eyes. He shifted in the leather seat, glancing at the rear-view mirror. His driver, Arthur, was navigating the slick roads of Seattle with practiced ease, but the tension inside the car was thick enough to choke on. Next to Caleb sat Vanessa, his fiancée of 6 months. She was scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her sharp, impeccably made-up features. She was beautiful, undeniably so, a former model turned lifestyle influencer who looked good on his arm at galas. But lately, Caleb had begun to wonder if she looked good anywhere else. "Are we almost there?" Vanessa sighed, not looking up from her screen. "I'm starving, Caleb. And honestly, this detour is ridiculous. Why couldn't we just fly the private chef out to the cabin?" "Because the pass is snowed in, Vanessa. We have to wait it out in town," Caleb replied, his voice a low rumble. He turned his head to look at the child seat next to him. 5-year-old Leo sat there, staring out the window at the blurred streetlights. He was a miniature version of Caleb. Same dark, unruly hair, same piercing blue eyes. But where Caleb's eyes were often cold and calculating, Leo's were wide and vacant. He clutched a worn-out plush rabbit by the ear, his knuckles white. "He's doing it again," Vanessa muttered, finally glancing over. "The staring. It's creepy, Caleb. Dr. Holloway said we need to force engagement, not let him dissociate like that. He's tired, Vanessa. Leave him be." "I'm just saying," she huffed, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. "When we're married, we're going to need a full-time au pair who actually disciplines him. Your current nanny, Mrs. Gable, is too soft. That's why he doesn't speak. He has no incentive to." Caleb clenched his jaw so hard, a muscle feathered near his ear. He didn't have the energy to fight her. Not tonight. "Sir," Arthur said from the front, his voice apologetic, "the engine temperature is spiking. I'm going to have to pull over. There's a diner just up ahead." "A diner?" Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "You can't be serious." "Just pull over, Arthur," Caleb commanded. The car rolled into the cracked pavement of Jerry's 24-hour stop. It was a relic of the 80s, with neon lights buzzing erratically and condensation fogging up the large glass windows. They made quite the entrance. Caleb, in a $3,000 bespoke suit. Vanessa, dripping in designer rain gear and diamonds. And little Leo, clutching his rabbit. The bell above the door chimed, and the few patrons, mostly truckers and weary travelers, stopped chewing to stare. They slid into a red vinyl booth in the corner. The place smelled of old coffee, frying bacon, and pine cleaner. "Don't touch anything, Leo," Vanessa hissed as the boy ran his hand along the jukebox selector on the wall. "It's filthy." Leo pulled his hand back, as if burned, shrinking into the corner of the booth. A waitress approached their table. Her name tag read, Sarah. She looked to be in her late 20s, her uniform slightly too large for her slender frame. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, escaping strands framing a face that was weary but kind. There were dark circles under her hazel eyes, speaking of double shifts and sleepless nights. "Evening, folks," Sarah said, pulling a notepad from her apron. Her voice was raspy but warm. "Coffee to start, or just some time to dry off?" "Bottled water," Vanessa said immediately. "Sparkling if you have it. And do you have a menu that hasn't been touched by 100 people?" Sarah didn't flinch at the tone. She just smiled, a small, sad thing. "I'll see what I can find. And for the little gentleman?" She looked directly at Leo. Most people ignored him or talked over him to Caleb, but Sarah crouched down slightly, meeting Leo's eye level. Leo didn't respond. He just stared at the salt shaker. "He'll have water," Caleb said dismissively. "He doesn't talk." Sarah paused, her eyes lingering on Leo. "Doesn't talk, or hasn't found the right words yet." "He's nonverbal," Vanessa interjected, clearly annoyed by the waitress's familiarity. "Just the water. And a salad. No dressing." Sarah nodded and walked away. 10 minutes later, the disaster struck. Sarah returned with a tray. As she set down the glasses, a trucker at the counter laughed loudly, slamming his fist on the table. The sudden noise terrified Leo. The boy gasped, his hands flying to his ears. He began to rock back and forth, a low, guttural keen rising from his throat. "Oh God, not here," Vanessa groaned, looking around to see if anyone was filming. "Caleb, make him stop. Everyone is looking." "Leo, buddy, it's okay," Caleb said, reaching out to touch his son's shoulder. Leo flinched violently, knocking the glass of water over. Ice and liquid splashed all over Vanessa's expensive lap. "You little brat!" Vanessa shrieked, jumping up. "Look what you did! This is cashmere!" The shouting only made it worse. Leo's keening turned into a full-blown meltdown. He was hyperventilating, his face turning red, tears streaming down his cheeks. Totally unreachable. Caleb felt that familiar, crushing weight of helplessness. He was a man who controlled billion-dollar mergers, yet he couldn't calm his own son. "I'm taking him to the car," Caleb said, standing up. "Wait." It was Sarah. She had dropped her tray on a nearby table and was stepping in. "Excuse me," Vanessa snapped. "This is a family matter." "He's in a sensory overload loop," Sarah said, ignoring Vanessa and looking straight at Caleb. Her voice was calm, authoritative, completely different from her waitress persona. "If you take him out in the rain now, the temperature shock will make him vomit." "Let me try." Caleb looked at her. There was something in her eyes, a fierce intelligence he hadn't noticed before. He stepped back. Sarah knelt on the dirty linoleum floor, heedless of the spilled water soaking her jeans. She didn't touch Leo. She didn't shush him. Instead, she placed her hand flat on the table in front of him. She started tapping a rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. She hummed a low, steady note. Not a song, just a vibration. Leo stopped rocking for a split second. Sarah caught his eye. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. She tapped her chin twice with her fingers, then moved her hand down to her chest. "Mother." Then she made a fist and circled it over her heart. "Sorry." She repeated the movements. "Mother." "Sorry." "Safe." The diner had gone silent. Vanessa was fuming, arms crossed. Caleb was frozen. Leo's breathing hitched. His tear-filled eyes locked onto Sarah's hands. Slowly, tremulously, Leo raised his small hand. He mimicked the circle over his heart. Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, clean spoon. She held it up, then tapped her lips. "Spoon," she whispered, forming the word with exaggerated lip movement. Leo stared, his mouth opened slightly. He made no sound, but his lips formed the shape. Poor. Oh, N. Sarah nodded encouragingly. Good. Very good. She looked up at Caleb, who was staring at her, as if she were an angel who had just descended from the ceiling tiles. He needs headphones, Sarah said softly, standing up and brushing off her knees. And a weighted blanket, if you have one. The noise in here, the buzzing of the neon light, it hurts him physically. It sounds like a dentist drill to him. Caleb swallowed hard. How did you do that? I used to. Sarah hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. She looked down at her stained apron. I just know. I'll go get some napkins for your wife. Fiancé, Vanessa corrected sharply, though she looked shaken. As Sarah walked away toward the kitchen, Caleb looked at his son. Leo was calm. He was holding the spoon Sarah had given him, turning it over and over in his hand, his breathing steady. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb didn't see a broken child. He saw a boy who had just been understood. And Caleb knew, with the ruthlessness that made him a tycoon, that he wasn't leaving this diner without that woman. The drive back to the Sterling estate the next morning was silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. Vanessa was sulking, furiously texting her friends about the nightmare trip. Leo was asleep in his car seat, still clutching the cheap metal spoon from the diner. Caleb hadn't allowed Arthur to throw it away. Caleb spent the entire drive staring out the window, but his mind wasn't on the scenery. It was on the name tag, Sarah. He had spent millions on specialists. Dr. Orris in Switzerland, the Neurological Center in New York. They all used charts, tablets, and sterile rooms. They treated Leo like a broken circuit board. Sarah had treated him like a terrified human being. Arthur, Caleb said quietly as they pulled into the long, winding driveway of his estate. Yes, sir? I need you to contact the private investigation team. I want a file on a Sarah. She didn't give a last name. The waitress at Jerry's stop. I want it within the hour. Vanessa scoffed. You're obsessing, Caleb. It was a parlor trick. She probably has an autistic nephew or something. Do not tell me you're thinking of hiring a waitress to watch our son. Our son. Caleb turned to her, his voice ice cold. Yesterday you called him a brat and worried about your cashmere. Until you learn to value him over your wardrobe, do not call him ours. Vanessa recoiled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She wasn't used to Caleb pushing back. He was usually too exhausted to care. By the time they entered the massive foyer of the mansion, Caleb's phone buzzed. It was his head of security, Mr. Thorne. Subject, Sarah Jenkins. Age 26. Current address, The Pines Motel. Room 4B. Temporary. Employment, waitress at Jerry's stop. 6 months. Education, Masters in Speech Language Pathology. University of Washington. Incomplete. Dropped out final semester. Caleb stopped walking. A master's in speech pathology. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a trained expert who had walked away right before the finish line. Why? He scrolled down. Financial status, heavy debt, multiple loans, family, single. Taking care of younger brother, Toby Jenkins, 19, currently hospitalized at St. Jude's long-term care facility following a car accident 2 years ago. The pieces clicked together. The tragedy, the need for quick cash, the empathy for trauma. Mrs. Gable, Caleb called out. The current nanny, a stern woman in her 50s who smelled of starch and indifference, appeared from the hallway. Yes, Mr. Sterling? I trust the trip was eventful. You're fired, Caleb said simply. Mrs. Gable blinked. Excuse me? You're fired. Arthur will have your severance check ready by noon. Please pack your things. But the agency. I don't care about the agency. Goodbye, Mrs. Gable. Caleb turned to Arthur. Keep the car running. We're going back to the diner. 3 hours later, Caleb walked back into Jerry's stop. It was daytime now, less crowded. Sarah was behind the counter, refilling a ketchup bottle. She looked even more exhausted than the night before. When she saw Caleb, she froze. She looked instinctively toward the door, as if expecting Vanessa or the police. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice guarded. Did you forget something?" "I did," Caleb said. He didn't sit. He stood at the counter, his expensive wool coat contrasting sharply with the grease-stained menu board. "I forgot to offer you a job," Sarah laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Sterling. Unless you're opening a diner in your living room, I don't think I'm qualified." "I know about the University of Washington," Caleb said softly. "I know you were top of your class in speech pathology. And I know about Toby." Sarah's face went white. She slammed the ketchup bottle down. "Who gave you the right to dig into my life?" "I'm a desperate father, Sarah. I have resources and I use them." Caleb leaned in, his blue eyes intense. "My son. He hasn't connected with anyone in 3 years. Not me. Not his doctors. Yesterday, he looked at you and he felt safe. I saw it." Sarah looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "I haven't practiced in 2 years. I dropped out. I'm not licensed. I don't care about a piece of paper. I care about results." Caleb pulled a folded check from his pocket and slid it across the counter. It was blank. "I want you to be his full-time communication therapist and nanny. Live-in. You'll have the east wing of the estate. Full autonomy on his schedule." Sarah looked at the check, then back at him. "I can't. My brother—" "I'll pay for Toby's care," Caleb interrupted. "Private care. The best specialists in the country. And I'll pay off your debts, all of them." Sarah's breath hitched. She looked around the dingy diner, at the life that was slowly grinding her into dust. Then she thought of Toby, lying in a hospital bed with substandard care, because that was all she could afford. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." "I know you heard my son when everyone else was deaf to him," Caleb said. "Name your salary, Sarah. Please." Sarah looked at the man. He was powerful, intimidating, and rich beyond comprehension. But in his eyes, she saw the same terrified desperation she felt every time she visited her brother. She grabbed a pen from her apron pocket. She didn't write a number. She wrote a condition. No interference. Not from the doctors, and not from the girlfriend. She slid the napkin to him. Caleb read it and nodded solemnly. "Done." Sarah untied her apron and dropped it on the counter. "Then let's go." The arrival of Sarah Jenkins at the Sterling estate was met with immediate hostility. Not from Leo, who actually perked up when he saw her, clutching his spoon, but from the staff, and specifically from Vanessa. Vanessa had been waiting in the drawing room when they arrived. When she saw Sarah walk in with a battered duffel bag, her jaw dropped. "You have got to be kidding me," Vanessa laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "The waitress? Caleb, are we running a charity or a household?" "Sarah is here to work with Leo," Caleb said firmly, signaling for the butler to take Sarah's bag. "She has full authority regarding his schedule." Sarah stepped forward. She felt small in the cavernous room with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but she held her head high. "Hello, Miss Carlton. I look forward to helping Leo." "Stay out of my way," Vanessa hissed as she walked past Sarah, bumping her shoulder intentionally. "And don't think for a second you belong here. You're just the flavor of the month," He'll fire you in 2 weeks when the kid doesn't miraculously start reciting Shakespeare. The first week was brutal. Sarah quickly realized that Leo's silence was a fortress he had built to protect himself. The house was cold, sterile, and full of echoing noises. She started by changing his environment. She asked Caleb to remove the harsh fluorescent lights in the playroom and replace them with soft, warm lamps. She demanded the removal of the terrifying abstract art that looked like angry faces. Vanessa complained about every change. "She's ruining the aesthetic, Caleb. That painting is a Basquiat." "It scares him," Caleb replied, signing the authorization to move it. "It goes." Sarah spent hours on the floor with Leo. She didn't force him to talk. She used American Sign Language, ASL, picture cards, and music. Caleb would often watch from the doorway of his home office, unseen. He saw Sarah laughing, rolling on the floor, making animal noises. He saw Leo smile, a real, toothy smile, for the first time in years. One evening, about 3 weeks into her employment, a storm knocked out the power. The mansion plunged into darkness. Caleb rushed toward Leo's room, knowing the boy was terrified of the dark. He had a flashlight in hand, his heart pounding. When he reached the door, he stopped. Candles were lit all around the room, casting a warm, flickering glow. Sarah and Leo were sitting under a makeshift tent made of sheets. Sarah was making shadow puppets on the wall, a rabbit, a bird. "And what does the bird say?" Sarah's voice was soft, melodic. There was a pause. Then a small, raspy voice, unused and rusty like an old gate, whispered, "Tweet." Caleb dropped the flashlight. It clattered loudly on the floor. Leo jumped. The spell was broken. Sarah poked her head out of the tent, her eyes wide. She saw Caleb standing there, tears streaming down his face in the darkness. "He spoke," Caleb choked out. "He spoke." "He did," Sarah smiled, her face glowing in the candlelight. In that moment, the distance between the billionaire and the waitress vanished. Caleb walked into the room and sank to his knees beside the tent. He didn't reach for Leo. He didn't want to scare him. He just sat there, breathing in the same air, feeling the warmth of the little world Sarah had built. "Thank you," he whispered to her, his blue eyes locking onto hers. The intensity of his gaze made Sarah's heart hammer against her ribs. But in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, Vanessa was watching. She had seen the look Caleb gave Sarah. It wasn't the look of an employer grateful to an employee. It was the look of a man seeing water after walking through a desert. Vanessa pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "I need a favor," she whispered into the receiver. "I need dirt on a Sarah Jenkins. And if there isn't any, I need you to manufacture some." The Sterling estate was preparing for the annual Sterling Future Foundation Gala, an event that drew the elite of the Pacific Northwest. In previous years, Caleb had treated this night as a necessary business obligation, a place to shake hands, sign oversized checks, and ensure his company's stock remained stable. But this year, the atmosphere was different. It had been 6 weeks since Sarah Jenkins had moved into the East Wing. In that short time, the transformation in the house was palpable. The silence that had once suffocated the hallways was replaced by the faint sounds of life. Leo was making progress. It was slow, agonizingly slow for an outsider, but to Caleb, it was miraculous. Leo was now using a tablet to communicate complex needs, pointing to icons for hungry, play, and dad. He had spoken 3 more words: ball, rain, and most heartbreakingly, stay. He said stay every night when Sarah tucked him in. On the morning of the gala, the house was a hive of activity. Florists were arranging white lilies in the foyer. Caterers were shouting instructions in the kitchen. Vanessa was in her element. She stood in the center of the ballroom, directing workers with the imperiousness of a general. She looked polished, sharp, and utterly in control. But beneath the surface, she was unraveling. She had noticed the change in Caleb. He came home earlier. He skipped conference calls to watch Leo's therapy sessions. And most dangerously, he smiled at Sarah. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a soft, unguarded look that he had never, not once, directed at Vanessa. "Arthur, move that centerpiece to the left. It's blocking the sight line," Vanessa shouted, then turned her attention to Caleb, who had just walked in with Leo and Sarah. Sarah was wearing jeans and a simple grey sweater, her hair in a ponytail. She looked out of place amidst the crystal and silk, yet she held Leo's hand with a natural ease that Vanessa envied and despised. "Caleb, darling," Vanessa cooed, gliding over and kissing his cheek. "I was thinking, tonight is the perfect opportunity to reintroduce Leo to society. The board members have been asking questions. If we dress him up and have him walk the red carpet with us, it will silence the rumors about his condition." Sarah stiffened. She squeezed Leo's hand gently. "Vanessa," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Leo is not a prop. He's not walking the red carpet." "But he's better," Vanessa insisted, her smile tight. "Sarah has been working miracles, hasn't she? Let's show off her work. Unless she's not confident in it." She threw a challenge in Sarah's direction. Sarah met her gaze calmly. "It's not about confidence, Miss Carlton. It's about sensory processing. A gala has flashing lights, loud music, and hundreds of strangers. It would set Leo back months. He stays in his room tonight." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "I didn't ask the help. I asked his father." Caleb didn't hesitate. "Sarah is right. Leo stays upstairs, and Sarah will stay with him." "No," Vanessa said quickly. "Absolutely not. Sarah is coming to the gala." Both Caleb and Sarah looked surprised. "She's part of the household now," Vanessa said, smoothing the front of her dress. "And frankly, Caleb, people are talking. They say you have a mysterious woman living in the East Wing. If you hide her, it looks sordid. If you bring her out, introduce her as the therapist, it legitimizes her presence. She needs to attend." Caleb considered this. He looked at Sarah. "She has a point about the rumors. The press is relentless. Would you be comfortable attending? Just for an hour?" Sarah hesitated. She owned nothing suitable for a gala. She felt comfortable on the floor with Lego blocks, not sipping champagne with billionaires. But she saw the plead in Caleb's eyes. He wanted her there. "If Leo is settled with the backup sitter," Sarah said slowly, "I suppose I can come down for a little while." "Excellent," Vanessa smiled, a predatory, dangerous smile. "I'll even have my stylist send something over for you. We can't have you looking like, well, this." That evening, the mansion was transformed into a glittering palace. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Upstairs, Sarah stared at herself in the full-length mirror. The dress Vanessa's stylist had found was suspicious. It was a deep emerald green silk gown. It was beautiful, stunningly so, but the neckline was plunging, daringly low. It was a dress meant to draw eyes, meant to make her look like a mistress, not a professional. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders to cover herself. She felt exposed. She kissed Leo on the forehead. "I'll be back soon, buddy. Mrs. Higgins is right here watching cartoons with you." Leo signed stay. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I'll be back before you fall asleep." She walked to the top of the grand staircase. Below, the party was in full swing. A string quartet played softly. As Sarah descended, the conversation near the stairs quieted. Then the silence spread. Caleb was standing at the bottom of the stairs, a glass of scotch in his hand, listening to a senator drone on about tax breaks. He looked up, and the glass nearly slipped from his fingers. Sarah looked breathtaking. The green silk draped over her body like water. Her hair was loose, cascading in soft waves, a rare change from her bun. She looked terrified, but radiant. Vanessa, standing next to Caleb in a silver-sequined dress, saw his reaction. She saw the way his pupils dilated, the way he unconsciously took a step toward the stairs. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through her. He's in love with her, she realized. He doesn't even know it yet. But he is. Ah, the help has arrived, Vanessa whispered, loud enough for the senator to hear. Caleb ignored her. He walked to the bottom of the stairs and offered his hand to Sarah. You look. Caleb searched for a word that wouldn't betray the thumping of his heart. Elegant. I feel ridiculous, Sarah murmured, taking his hand. Her skin was warm against his. You're the most real thing in this room, he said, his voice low. For the next hour, Caleb didn't leave her side. He introduced her not as the nanny, but as Leo's therapist and the woman who saved my son. He spoke of her with a reverence that made the socialites whisper behind their fans. Vanessa watched from the bar, her grip on her champagne flute tightening until the stem snapped. Glass shattered. Oh dear, a waiter rushed over. I'm fine, Vanessa said, staring at the blood dripping from her finger. I'm perfectly fine. She walked out of the ballroom, heading not to the bathroom, but to the service corridor. She pulled a burner phone from her clutch. Is it done? She asked. The package is in place, a gruff voice replied. Bedroom, second drawer, under the socks. And the transfer? Wired to her brother's hospital account. Looks like a direct deposit. Good, Vanessa hung up. She wrapped a napkin around her bleeding finger. She wasn't just going to fire Sarah. She was going to destroy her. The crash happened at 10:15 p.m. The gala was winding down. Caleb and Sarah were on the terrace, escaping the heat of the ballroom. The night air was cool, and the tension between them was electric. They were standing close, too close. Caleb was just leaning in, his hand grazing her arm. Sarah, he began, his voice rough. I don't know what's happening to me, but a piercing scream shattered the moment. It came from upstairs. Leo! Caleb shouted, turning and sprinting toward the doors. Sarah was right on his heels, hiking up her gown to run. They burst into Leo's room. The scene was chaotic. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly backup sitter, was wringing her hands in the corner. Leo was on the bed, thrashing violently. His eyes were rolled back in his head, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. He was having a seizure. Oh God, Leo! Caleb rushed to the bed, grabbing his son. Call 911. Somebody call 911. I already did. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, looking horrified. What happened? Mrs. Higgins, what happened? I don't know, the old woman wailed. He was fine, watching his show, and then he started shaking. Sarah pushed past Caleb. Her medical training kicked in. She checked Leo's airway, turned him on his side. How long has he been seizing? 2 minutes, Mrs. Higgins sobbed. He's never had a seizure before, Caleb yelled, his face pale with terror. Why is this happening? Sarah looked at Leo's nightstand. There was a glass of water there, half empty. She picked it up and sniffed it. It smelled faint, sweet, like almonds. Did he drink this? Sarah asked. Yes, he was thirsty, Mrs. Higgins said. The paramedics arrived in a whirlwind of noise and equipment. They loaded Leo onto a stretcher. Caleb was shouting orders, terrifying the EMTs. As they were leaving, Vanessa grabbed the arm of the lead paramedic. Check for sedatives, she said loudly. Please, check him for sedatives. Caleb stopped. What? Vanessa looked at Sarah, her eyes wide with mock concern. I found something earlier. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but Caleb, you need to look in her room." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, confused. "My room." "Go!" Vanessa screamed at Caleb. "Go with your son. I'll handle the police." "Police?" Sarah stepped back. Caleb looked at Sarah. The trust in his eyes was fracturing, replaced by the primal fear of a father. "Arthur, take Sarah to the library. Don't let her leave. Vanessa, show the police whatever you found." He ran out the door after the stretcher. 3 hours later. The hospital waiting room was sterile and white, the environment Caleb hated most. He sat with his head in his hands. The doctor came out. Dr. Evans, a man Caleb had trusted for years. "He's stable," Dr. Evans said. Caleb let out a breath he had been holding for hours. "But Caleb, we need to talk about the toxicology report." "Tell me," Caleb said, standing up. "We found high levels of diazepam in his system, Valium, and a synthetic relaxant often used in psychiatric wards." Caleb felt the room spin. "Valium? He's 5 years old." "It creates a state of compliance," the doctor said gravely. "It suppresses the nervous system. It can make a child appear calm, focused, even capable of mimicking speech if the dosage is timed right. But an overdose triggers seizures. It can make a child appear calm." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. The sudden progress, the way Leo was so good for Sarah, the way he slept so soundly. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. She had sent a photo. It was a picture of an open drawer in Sarah's room at the mansion. Hidden under a stack of socks were 3 orange prescription bottles. The labels were peeled off, but the pills matched the description. Under the photo was a screenshot of a bank transfer. $50,000 transferred to St. Jude's Hospital. Patient, Toby Jenkins. Source, Sterling Household Petty Cash Account. "No," Caleb whispered. She wouldn't. But the evidence was right there. She needed the money for her brother. She needed to show results to keep the job. She had drugged his son to make him perform, to keep the paycheck coming, and she was stealing from him to pay her brother's bills. The betrayal was so absolute, so devastating, that it didn't feel like anger. It felt like death. Caleb walked out of the hospital. He got into the car where Arthur was waiting. "Take me home," Caleb said. His voice was dead. When Caleb arrived back at the estate, it was 2 a.m. Sarah was sitting in the library, still in the green dress, shivering. 2 security guards were standing by the door. When Caleb walked in, Sarah stood up, relief flooding her face. "Caleb, is he okay? Is Leo—" "Don't," Caleb said. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying calm. "Don't say his name." He threw the toxicology report on the table between them. Then the photo of the pills. Then the bank transfer record. Sarah looked at the papers. Her hands shook as she picked them up. "Diazepam? I didn't give him this. Caleb, I would never—" "Stop," Caleb cut her off. "The pills were in your drawer, Sarah. The money was wired to your brother's account today." "I didn't wire any money, and those pills aren't mine." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You have to believe me. This is a setup. Vanessa wasn't the one alone with him all day," Caleb said coldly. "Vanessa didn't need a miracle to keep a job she was desperate for. You drugged my son to make him talk. You risked his life for a paycheck." "I loved him," Sarah screamed, the dam breaking. "I love him. I taught him to speak because he wanted to, not because I drugged him." "Get out," Caleb said. He turned his back to her. "Caleb, please, look at me. You know me." "I don't know you," Caleb said to the fireplace. I know a con artist who played on a grieving father's weakness. If you aren't off this property in 10 minutes, I'm handing this evidence to the police, and you will go to prison for child endangerment and embezzlement. You will lose your license, your freedom, and you will never see your brother again." Sarah froze. The threat to Toby was the final blow. She knew she couldn't fight Caleb Sterling's lawyers. Not with this evidence. She wiped her face. The green silk dress felt like a shroud now. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "And the sad part is, the only one who will really suffer is Leo." She walked out of the library. Caleb listened to her footsteps fade away. Only when the front door slammed shut did he allow himself to collapse into the leather armchair. He poured a drink, his hands shaking so hard the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. Upstairs, in the empty nursery, the silence returned. Heavy, oppressive, permanent. The silence that descended upon the Sterling estate in the weeks following Sarah's departure was not the peaceful quiet of a library. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. It had been a month since the gala. A month since Caleb had thrown Sarah out into the night. A month since he had believed the lie that saved his pride but destroyed his heart. Leo had regressed. The regression was absolute and terrifying. He didn't just stop speaking. He stopped existing in the world. He refused to look at picture cards. He threw the tablet across the room, shattering the screen. He spent his days sitting in the corner of his room, rocking back and forth, clutching the cheap metal spoon Sarah had given him until his knuckles turned white. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't sleep without sedation. The doctors, the best doctors Caleb had rehired, suggested institutionalization. "He is a danger to himself, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Evans said during a house call, watching Leo bang his head rhythmically against the padded wall. The progress he made, it was likely a fluke, or, as the toxicology report suggested, a chemically induced state of compliance. It wasn't real. "It felt real," Caleb whispered, staring at his son through the glass of the observation door. He laughed. He called me Dad. "Drug-induced euphoria," Vanessa said, stepping up beside him. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder. "It was a trick, Caleb, a cruel, expensive trick performed by a desperate woman. You need to let it go. We need to move on." Vanessa had moved into the estate officially. She had taken over the redecorating, removing every trace of Sarah's influence. The warm lamps were gone, replaced by chic, modern lighting. The sensory toys were boxed up and sent to charity. "I found a wonderful boarding school in Switzerland," Vanessa continued, her voice light. "They specialize in difficult cases. They have high walls, excellent security. We could send him next week. Then we can finally focus on the wedding. You look exhausted, darling." "We need a vacation." Caleb looked at her. For the first time, he really looked at her. He saw the coldness in her eyes, the impatience. She didn't see a suffering child. She saw a piece of luggage she wanted to put in storage. "Get away from me," Caleb muttered. "Excuse me?" Vanessa blinked. "I said, get away from me." Caleb turned and walked away, down the hall toward the east wing. He hadn't entered Sarah's room since that night. He had ordered the maids not to touch it. He told himself it was because it was a crime scene. But deep down, he knew it was because he couldn't bear to erase her smell. He pushed the door open. The room was dusty. The dresser drawers were still open, the socks disarrayed where Vanessa had found the pills. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. He put his head in his hands. He felt like a man drowning. Why would she do it? The question haunted him. She was so gentle. She made him shadow puppets. She protected him from the rain. His eyes wandered to the corner of the room, to the small desk where Sarah kept her notes. There was a stack of notebooks. Caleb picked up the top one. It was titled Leo's Progress, Month 1. He opened it. It wasn't a log of hours for billing. It was a diary. April 4th. Leo smiled today. He likes the texture of velvet. Must buy more velvet pillows. April 10th. He's afraid of the dark because he thinks shadows are monsters. We made friends with the shadows today. April 12th. I think he loves his father so much it hurts him. He watches Caleb leave for work and puts his hand on the window glass. I need to help them connect. Caleb's hands trembled. These weren't the notes of a con artist. These were the notes of someone who loved his son. He flipped to the back of the notebook. Tucked into the pocket was a small SD card. Written on the label in Sarah's neat handwriting was Session Backups. For Caleb. Surprise for Father's Day. Father's Day was next week. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood up and ran to his office. He inserted the SD card into his computer. There were dozens of video files. He clicked the last one. The timestamp was 4 p.m. on the day of the gala. The video opened. It showed the nursery. Leo was sitting on the floor, building a tower. He looked happy, calm. Sarah walked into the frame. She wasn't holding pills. She was holding a storybook. "Okay, Leo," she said, her voice clear and loving. "We're going to practice for the party, just in case you want to say hi to Daddy." She sat with him for an hour. No drugs, no force, just patience. Then, at timestamp 5:15 p.m., Sarah looked at her watch. "I have to go get dressed, buddy. You stay here with Mrs. Higgins, okay?" She left. The video continued. Mrs. Higgins came in, sat in the chair, and promptly fell asleep. At 5:45 p.m., the door opened again. Caleb leaned closer to the screen, his breath hitching. It wasn't Sarah. It was Vanessa. She was wearing a silk robe. She looked around the room, ensuring Mrs. Higgins was asleep. Then she walked over to the bedside table. Caleb watched in horror as Vanessa pulled a small vial from her pocket. She poured a clear liquid into Leo's water glass. Then she pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped the vial, placing it, not in her pocket, but she walked out of frame toward the bathroom. Then she walked over to Leo. She leaned down and whispered something in his ear. The microphone on the camera picked it up faintly. "Drink up, you little freak. Mommy needs you to make a scene tonight." Caleb froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. The video continued. Vanessa left. 10 minutes later, Leo drank the water. 20 minutes later, the seizure began. Caleb sat back in his chair. The world tilted. It wasn't just the poisoning. He clicked another file on the computer, his banking logs. He had his security team, Thorne, trace the IP address of the transfer that sent the $50,000 to Sarah's brother. It didn't come from the petty cash terminal in the office. It came from a mobile device. Device ID. Vanessa droste iPhone 12 Pro. She had done it all. She had nearly killed his son. She had framed the woman he was falling in love with. And she had done it with a smile on her face, sleeping in his bed, planning their wedding. Caleb stood up. The grief was gone. The confusion was gone. In its place was a cold, terrifying rage, the kind of rage that topples empires. He picked up the phone. "Thorne, get the car and call the police commissioner, personally." The storm outside matched the fury inside the Sterling mansion. Thunder shook the window panes as Caleb walked into the main drawing room. Vanessa was there with her wedding planner, looking at fabric swatches. "I think the ivory is too plain," she was saying. "We need something bolder. Champagne, perhaps?" "Get out," Caleb said. Vanessa looked up, annoyed. Caleb, please. We're busy. Don't be rude. Arthur, Caleb said calmly. The doors opened. 2 police officers walked in, followed by Thorne. Vanessa stood up, dropping the fabric swatches. What is this? Caleb, what is going on? You're under arrest, Ms. Carlton, one of the officers said, stepping forward with handcuffs. Arrest? For what? Vanessa laughed nervously, looking at Caleb. Caleb, tell them to stop. This is ridiculous. Caleb walked over to her. He held up his phone and played the audio clip from the nursery cam. Drink up, you little freak. Vanessa's face went grey. All the colour drained from her skin. She looked like a ghost. I didn't, she stammered. Attempted murder of a minor, Caleb listed, his voice dead. Fraud, embezzlement, filing a false police report, and the cruelty. The cruelty is something the law can't punish enough, but I will make sure you spend every cent you have on lawyers who will fail you. Caleb, I did it for us! Vanessa screamed as the officers grabbed her arms. She was taking you away from me. That waitress, she's nothing. I love you. You don't know what love is, Caleb said. Take her away. He watched as they dragged her out, her heels scraping across the marble floor she had been so desperate to own. When the doors closed, Caleb turned to Thorne. Where is she? We found her, sir, Thorne said, looking at his tablet. But it's not good. Where? She's at St. Jude's Hospital. Her brother. He went into cardiac arrest 2 days ago. They cut his funding when the stolen money was reclaimed by the bank. She's sleeping in the waiting room. Caleb felt a physical pain in his chest. He had done that. He had reclaimed the funds. He had almost killed her brother, just as Vanessa had almost killed his son. We're going, Caleb said. Now. The hospital waiting room was crowded and smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Caleb Sterling, dressed in a $5,000 suit, looked out of place among the plastic chairs and vending machines. He saw her immediately. Sarah was curled up in a corner chair, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. She looked thinner. Her eyes were sunken, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. She was asleep, her hand clutching her phone. Caleb approached her slowly. He felt unworthy to even breathe the same air. He knelt beside her chair. Sarah. She stirred, her eyes fluttered open. For a second there was confusion, then recognition, then terror. She scrambled back, pulling her legs up. No, please, I don't have the money yet. I'm working double shifts at the diner. I'll pay you back. Please don't hurt Toby. He's all I have. Her fear broke him. He had made her afraid of him. Sarah. No, Caleb choked out, tears burning his eyes. I'm not here for the money. I know everything. Sarah paused, breathing hard. You know? I found the camera, Caleb said. I saw what she did. I saw what you did. You were reading him a story. You were protecting him. Sarah slumped against the wall, the adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted. Is Leo okay? That was her first question. Not am I in trouble. Not can I have my job back. But is Leo okay? He's not good, Caleb admitted, his voice cracking. He stopped speaking. He stopped eating. He needs you, Sarah. I need you. Sarah looked away. You threw me out. You called me a con artist. You almost let my brother die. I know, Caleb said, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. I reinstated Toby's funding this morning. I tripled it. He's being moved to the VIP suite as we speak. Dr. Aris is flying in to treat him. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. I don't want your money, Caleb. Then take my apology, Caleb said, reaching out but stopping inches from her hand. Take my begging. I was a fool. I was a scared, angry father, and I let the wrong person in. Please, don't punish Leo for my stupidity." Sarah looked at his hand. She saw the shaking. She saw the raw desperation in the eyes of the man who controlled the world, but couldn't control his own heart. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Take me to him," she whispered. The reunion at the mansion was quiet. Caleb led Sarah to Leo's room. The door was open. Leo was sitting in his usual spot, rocking, the spoon in his hand. Sarah didn't run to him. She didn't shout. She simply walked in, sat on the floor a few feet away, and started to hum. It was the same hum from the diner, a low, steady vibration. Leo stopped rocking, his head tilted. Sarah tapped the floor. Tap, 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 tap. Leo turned. His eyes were dull, lifeless. But then he saw her. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes with his fists, as if checking if he was dreaming. Sarah signed, "Mother. Sorry." Safe. Leo dropped the spoon. It clattered on the floor. He scrambled up, his little legs moving as fast as they could. He threw himself at Sarah, burying his face in her neck, sobbing. Not a silent cry, but a loud, healthy, pouring out of grief. Sarah held him tight, rocking him, tears streaming down her own face. "I've got you. I'm here. I'm never leaving again." Caleb stood in the doorway, watching them. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Arthur, offering him a handkerchief. Caleb realized he was crying openly. After a long time, Leo pulled back. He looked at Sarah, then he looked past her, at the doorway, at Caleb. Leo stood up. He walked over to Caleb. Caleb dropped to his knees, terrified. Leo reached out and placed his small hand on Caleb's cheek. He looked at Caleb with clear, present eyes. Then he looked at Sarah, as if asking for permission. Sarah nodded, smiling through her tears. Leo took a deep breath. His voice was small, but steady. "Duh. Daddy." Caleb broke. He pulled his son into his arms, burying his face in the boy's hair. "I'm here, Leo. Daddy's here." The garden of the Sterling estate was in full bloom. It wasn't a formal, stiff garden anymore. It was a playground. There was a tree house, a sensory sand pit, and a vegetable patch where Toby, now recovering and in a wheelchair, was helping Leo plant carrots. Caleb stood on the porch, watching them. "You're staring again," a voice said beside him. Caleb turned. Sarah was there. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform, and she wasn't wearing a designer gown. She was wearing a simple sundress, and she looked beautiful. "I like the view," Caleb smiled, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Toby is doing great," Sarah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Leo talked his ear off this morning about dinosaurs." "He talks too much now," Caleb joked, though they both knew he loved every single word. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked. "The guests are arriving." "Let them wait," Caleb said. He turned her to face him. "I haven't kissed my wife yet today." He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that held all the promise of the future. They had married a month ago, in a small ceremony. No press, no gala. Just them. Leo, Toby, and Arthur. The nightmare was over. The silence was broken, and the house that was once a tomb was now, finally, a home. And that is the incredible story of how a single act of kindness in a roadside diner changed the fate of a broken family forever. Sarah proved that you don't need a PhD or $1 million to heal a heart. You just need patience and love. Vanessa learned the hard way that greed and cruelty always leave a trail, and that the truth, like water, always finds a way out. Caleb and Sarah's journey reminds us that sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born with or the one society tells you to have. It's the one that makes you feel safe. Call to action. What did you think of Caleb's reaction when he found the camera footage? Would you have been able to forgive him if you were Sarah? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a brand new drama coming out next week involving a secret billionaire and a runaway bride that you won't want to miss. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next video.